All right, hello people from the internet. Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. The time has come for me to make a YouTube original video talking about some spells in Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup. Today we're going to be talking about fire magic. Before I start, please consider speeding up the video. I listen to myself in 1.5 speed. Maybe that will help you too. These videos don't go through any editing, so yeah, they're getting kind of long, and it's probably much more palatable for you if you speed it up. But with that out of the way, let's talk about fire magic. It focuses mainly on dealing fire damage over long distance with many effective conjurations. Very simple and brief description for what is pretty much a very simple school. Very one-dimensional. It just so happens that the one dimension that fire magic handles itself in is kind of like the most important one in the entirety of the game, with it being really good at killing things. So yeah, the other line, I always say it, but every school has that, so there's no point in reading it. If you read it once, you read it every time. Um, but let's get out of here and let's read. Mm, 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 or let's get a spell. Okay, and the spell that we're gonna be getting is um, Foxfire. Aha, Foxfire. Foxfire conjures two balls of burning swamp gas adjacent to the caster. The balls will rapidly seek the nearest monster and burn them. They will dissipate harmlessly if unable to reach a target, or if the caster swaps places with them. This spell is unfortunately a level 1 spell, and D1 is the land of the corridors, There's a lot of corridors here, and you also cannot risk just fighting in the open in case you find multiple monsters. And D1, fighting more than one monster at a time can be a death sentence, so it is very recommended not to do such a thing. Um, Regardless, Foxfire is an okay spell, actually, despite my grievances with it, and despite how bad it is in a corridor. I think it's a pretty good spell, since its damage output is quite high for a level 1 spell. It doesn't check evasion, I think. Sorry. And it doesn't check evasion. Its damage is quite high, and it also is full screen range, pretty much. Sometimes the Foxfires in generate behind you, and so they cannot see the monster that you want them to hit. So they go in like the opposite direction, which is kind of annoying. But as long as you don't cast it full screen range, as long as you make sure that the monster can see one tile behind you, it's like almost guaranteed that they will hit whatever you want them to hit. You do not target them, you just cast them and they just attack whatever nearest monster. So it's kind of hard to control, very bad against multiple monsters at the same time, but it's pretty good damage output. It clears monsters really fast. When it comes to fire magic, at least for the very beginning, you want to like take fights in the open. If you don't take fights in the open when you're using Foxfire, you're gonna be very sad because it's gonna underperform very heavily. But yeah, that's pretty much all that I have to say about Foxfire. It's a level 1 spell after all. Um, you might, however, be very inclined to upgrade it as soon as possible into Scorch. Scorches a random foe. Those injured by this have their resistance to fire burned away for a short time. This spell doesn't check evasion and doesn't check shield. I think it does check armor class in its entirety. Don't be surprised if you have a hard time killing something that's wearing plate or a weapon of protection with this. It's just how it is, unfortunately. But this spell is, unlike Foxfire, really good for fighting in corridors. It has relatively short range, and you also do not target it. It will hit one random monster that's within its range. The proper way to use it is to try to make it so that monsters um, are always, or that you only have one monster. Sorry, that you only have one monster within its range. If you only have one monster within its range, you can be guaranteed that this is gonna hit that monster. If you don't have only one monster, the damage will be diluted quite a bit. But with enough casts, you're just gonna kill everything. Of course, that may not always be a possibility. You may not have enough mana or enough HP to cast it that much. So do keep that in mind. This spell is pretty good, and as I mentioned, it might be something that you should get immediately upon reaching experience level 2 as a fire elementalist, so you can actually fight in corridors. This doesn't completely replace Foxfire. Since Foxfire has some pretty okay damage output and much more range, it's more like you fight just outside a corridor and you spam Foxfire, and when the monsters are getting kind of close, you retreat into the corridor and then you start scorching them, and the damage from Foxfire plus the damage from Scorch should be enough to just kill the monster. Aha. That's how I would do it, and that's how I use this every now and then. Sometimes I just scorch everything. If it's only like a single monster, there's no point in retreating close to a corridor for a single monster, as long as I know for sure that the arena is safe to fight on. So yeah, that is a Scorch. Next on our list we have Conjure Flame. Conjure Flame conjures burning embers at the caster's feet, which will burst into flame soon after. Any creature, including the caster, that stands on the embers will smother them, so the casters are well advised to step away immediately after casting. Recasting the spell will also ignite the embers, burning the caster. This spell doesn't exist for practical purposes. This spell used to be the best spell in the game. It got severely nerfed a couple of versions ago. Like, it's been quite a while ago, actually, almost 2 years probably. And ever since then, it's completely unusable. In my opinion, this spell should be removed. I don't think any character wants to get this. It is extremely niche. It is no longer what it used to be, but that's understandable because what it used to be was super broken. You used to be able to target a tile with like a lot of range, and it immediately placed a cloud on the tile that you targeted. Now it only casts itself where you are. You need to move away and not have a monster next to you when you move away, because the monster would just destroy the conjure flame. Like, it would never be conjured. And if you stand where you are, the conjure flame just doesn't generate as well. You need to double cast it in order to generate the conjure flame. So then it doesn't cost 3 HP to create a conjure flame. It costs 6 HP plus the damage, or 6 mana, sorry, plus the damage that you take from the one turn of standing on fire, plus the damage of the monster that's next to you. Because if you want to double cast it, it's for a reason, and that reason is that there's a monster next to you in a corridor that you want to like break away from. So yeah, it's pretty rough. I don't get this. I just pretend that it doesn't exist personally. It might be useful to you, but I don't bother with it. Yep. Yeah, never. I never get it. I think the only way that this is mildly useful is if you're a Jin, because Jins have a lot of fire resistance. Sorry. So they can actually double cast it, and it's not the worst thing ever. Uh-huh. That's just what I think about Conjure Flame. Unfortunately, it is whack, but it is not well, the next spell is not whack. Yeah, and the next spell is actually good. Inner Flame. Fills an enemy with an intense fire. This fire is released anytime the target is hit and explosively released upon death. The size of the explosion cause is dependent on the size of the target. Monsters that are giant will create a radius 2 explosion. Monsters that are not giant will create a radius 1 explosion. That means ogres and stuff will create a radius 1 explosion. Hydras will create a radius 2 explosion, so be prepared for that. monsters like cyclopes, giants, of course, dragons will also create radius to explosion. It is unlikely that you're going to be using this specific spell on high willpower monsters like dragons, but you can still hex them with inner flame if you use a scroll of or a scroll of immolation. So keep that in mind. Um, so yeah, this spell is really good if you combine it with something that lets you hit monster like smite targeted, because this spell is smite targeted. So something along the lines of poisonous vapors, airstrike are really good at dealing or like at complementing inner flame. Um, Toxic radiance also really nice for that. Yeah, Inner Flame is quite nice. It is a hex, and I am not really that much of a fan of hexes, but I like this one because it actually does something, you know? Like, it has an enhanced chance to succeed compared to other hexes, and it just deals a ton of damage, and I like spells that deal a ton of damage. So yeah, I would recommend you to get this and give it a try if you have never used it. Um, I consider it to be really good. Next on our list we have let's see what we got. You have Sticky Flame. Sticky Flame conjures a glove of Sticky Flame, covering an adjacent creature with liquid fire for a short while. This spell is melee ranged. It deals okay damage. Its duration scales with spell power, so if you have a lot of spell power, it lasts for quite a while. It's really good. It's gotten nerfed, unfortunately. In Trunk, there's something called attacks of opportunity, which make it so that monsters next to you have a 1 in 3 chance to get a free attack when you move, which is really bad for spells like these, and for poison as well, and for other things. But yeah, really bad for Sticky Flame. We're talking about Sticky Flame, so yeah, let's just focus on that. Um, the attacks of opportunity issue with Sticky Flame is that Sticky Flame is a melee ranged spell. So what you used to do before was to cast a Sticky Flame and then run for your life and then recast it when it wore off on the monster that was next to you, which is still chasing you. Um, that kind of thing is not longer possible thanks to attacks of opportunity, because the monsters are just gonna get in a ton of attacks on you while you run away from them. So even though you can be at full HP casting Sticky Flame on a monster, it can still reasonably leave you very hurt or just straight up kill you. I'm thinking about things like Death Yaks and other nasty Lair denizens that just have a ton of HP and hit very hard. Unfortunately, Sticky Flame is, in my opinion, a bit too nerfed after the change to attacks of opportunity, and I would like to see this either buffed into having a bit of range, like maybe 3000 range wouldn't be so unreasonable, or just a straight up removed from the game or reworked into something that's actually usable, that's compatible with attacks of opportunity. Regardless, Sticky Flame has always been a strong spell, even if you're playing a version without attacks of opportunity, but it is kind of boring because it's just like cast it on a monster, then run away, and then cast it again, which I don't know, I don't like doing that kind of thing. It is powerful, and I will not hesitate to use it, but I would prefer to use many other things. And I would be very happy to, have the option between using, or like having the option to use something else, is what I'm trying to say. Um, but anyway, next on our list we have Flame Wave, which is kind of an omen of the removal of Sticky Flame. Um, Yeah, don't quote me on that. There's nothing set in stone, but I wouldn't be surprised if Sticky Flame just died as a direct result of Flame Wave existing in the game, since Flame Wave is also a conjuration fire. It's drastically different, however, and I would say that before attacks of opportunity, Flame Wave was worse, much worse. The damage is not very good, but anyway, Flame Wave blasts the caster's surroundings with a wave of fire. If the caster maintains focus and supplies the spell with magical power by waiting in place and not taking any other actions, More and larger flame waves will radiate outward. As you can see, also level 4 Conjuration Fire, same as the Sticky Flame. The damage is not the same as the Sticky Flame, and the spell deals very little damage for a level 4 spell. I understand why that is, because of its unique mechanic um, of like being recastable for very cheap. Like the subsequent channeling of Flame Wave after the first initial cast only costs 1 mana, so it's 4 mana and then 1 mana, 1 mana, and then 4 mana again. But the radius increases, so like when you first cast it, it costs 4 mana for a radius 1 explosion of fire that barely deals any damage, and then you channel it 1 more time for 1 more mana for a radius 2 explosion that barely deals any damage, and then you channel it 1 more time for a radius 3 explosion that barely deals any damage. So yeah, the damage is theoretically supposed to accumulate. In practice, however, what's gonna happen is that you're gonna cast it like 9 times, including like 9 times counting the channels against something like a Nork Knight or so, and it's not gonna kill it, or against Death Yak, just because those monsters have a lot of armor class, and this thing really doesn't hit hard enough. So in my opinion, it should be buffed. It When it first released, it was really good, and then it got over nerfed, and ever since it got over nerfed, it hasn't been good, in my opinion. So yeah, I would like to see a buff to this, so that it's actually like a reasonable thing to get, and a rework or removal of Sticky Flame, because Sticky Flame is really not compatible with attacks of opportunity, in my opinion, unless you do some fancy stuff such as Blink, but you don't really get Blink. Blink is a really rare spell. It's not something that you can really rely on in order to make your starting spell work. I guess it's not really a starting spell anymore, Sticky Flame. Um, but yeah, anyway, next on our list we have Fireball. Fireball hurls an explosive ball of fire. Who would have suspected? Fireball is also not very damaging. It is one of the loudest spells in the game as well, so it is really not a spell that you can spam. If you spam it, you run the risk of just running into a bunch of monsters that are gonna like come attracted to the noise, while you just spend 20, 25 mana casting multiple instances of Fireball, and therefore are very unlikely to have more mana, which is a really bad thing. Even in places that are noisy, like shoals or swamp, this is not very good for those places. Yeah, Fireball is, in my opinion, not the greatest spell. I think it's still worth getting every now and then, just in case you need that utility of the spell that doesn't check evasion, doesn't check shield, um, but it doesn't deal that much damage. It's okay at killing Spriggans, but that's pretty much it. I wouldn't bother with it for anything else. Um, and usually, even if I started a Fire Elementalist, I wouldn't get too excited if I found like Sticky Flame or Fireball. Um, so yeah, this spell does get okay with higher spell power, but yeah, the reason why I may have like a negative impression of this spell is because it used to be a starter spell, and as a starter spell, Fireball is absolutely garbage because it scales really hard with spell power, which is something that you most definitely do not have when you're starting the game. So you may be able to cast it, but it's gonna deal like trash damage. It's gonna deal probably the damage of Stun Arrow, or maybe a bit more than that, for a much high cost, a much higher cost. So yeah. It is not a starter spell anymore, but it still holds a bit. Like you may find it early on, and if you don't find it early on, you also probably have better things to get. Better spells, maybe in different schools, but still better spells. Also, better spells that don't cost that are not dual school. For it being dual school and dealing that little damage, I think this also needs a buff. Um, the reason why Farm Magic is so far appearing to be relatively weak is probably dependent on or it's not dependent, but like it's probably related to the fact that back in the day, fire magic used to be like the craziest, most powerful thing, and ever since it hit that peak of power, it's been getting nerfed and nerfed and nerfed and nerfed. And now I don't really like it, except for like a couple of spells that I have yet to mention. But I think the more we progress into fire magic, the more exciting the spells are gonna get. Um, so yeah, and you have probably already noticed, but like with many schools, there's a spell or two that are like just a straight up utility. With fire magic, there's no such thing as utility. It's only damage and damage and damage. And unfortunately, the damage kind of pales in comparison to those other schools. Like if you ask me, hey, would you rather have Fireball or Frozen Ramparts? I would take Frozen Ramparts anytime. And Frozen Ramparts is a level 3 spell single school compared to a level 5 spell dual school. That doesn't make a lot of sense. It's, in my opinion, an indicator that Fireball is weak more than Frozen Ramparts being strong. Because Frozen Ramparts is strong, but Fireball is also really weak. Anyway, this is the Fire Magic overview, not the Ice Magic overview. I already made that. So let's see for the next spell. Um, Next spell is gonna be. Oh, I missed Ignite Poison. It's okay because I already talked about this on the transmutations overview. I like Ignite Poison, pretty good spell. Pretty good indeed. However, I do think that Ignite Poison is it's very strong to be a starter spell, unfortunately. And it not being a starter spell means that Venom Mage is gonna have issues with some early game monsters, such as Whites. And unfortunately, I have to say this. Um, Hornet zombies and Centaur Warrior zombies were removed from Trunk, from the early game in Trunk, so like you're not gonna stumble into them anymore, unless it's like a really weird bolt. So for the most part, Venom mages and necromancers no longer have to fear that kind of thing. But yeah, before it was pretty rough. They were pretty much unkillable for a Venom mage or a necromancer, and you were also not able to run away from them. So yeah, pretty rough kind of enemy to encounter. But yeah, anyway, sticky or sorry, not sticky flame. Ignite poison is a fantastic spell. It is so powerful that it cannot really be a starting spell, as I already mentioned, and yeah, it's just worth getting on pretty much every character. Poisonous vapors, ignite poison, toxic radiance, and if you keep on with the path of poison and transmutations, you can get Noxious Bug, which is fantastic, incredible. I already talked about many of those spells in my transmutations overview. I wonder if I should have made the poison magic overview first so I could give the more detailed description on those in that particular video. But anyway, this is really more of a poison magic spell than a fire magic spell, because if you only have fire skill, it doesn't do anything. You need a way to poison monsters for this spell to be worth anything. So do keep it in mind if you stumble upon it, because it's ridiculously strong. Um, so yeah, that's Ignite Poison. I've already talked too much about it. No, not in this video, but in other videos. Next on our list we have Starburst. Starburst releases penetrating bolts of fire from the caster in every direction. Very simplistic descriptions, I've noticed. I find it funny how some spells in our schools have like 4 or 5 paragraphs. Well, yeah, paragraphs of descriptions. Um, in like the fire magic school, it's like a miracle if it reaches more than one paragraph of description. Uh, so yeah, Starburst is a pretty okay spell. It actually deals a lot of damage. It's not that accurate, but it has a lot of utility. It hits a decent chunk of the screen, because every direction kind of thing. Um, Fire magic was severely hit by positional magic. Positional magic made it so that need to either position yourself or maneuver the position of monsters for you to get the maximum advantage out of like casting your spell. Those who have been playing Crawl for a while will remember Bolt of Fire, Bolt of Cold, Bolt of Draining, Bolt of Venom. There were many Bolt spells, none of which exist in the game nowadays because they were pretty lazy. They were just like a copy paste of other spells, you know. Um, Starburst is like Bolt of Fire but reworked. It deals more damage than Bolt of Fire ever did, and it also can hit many more monsters than Bolt of Fire ever did. The downside is that you don't get to aim it, so you don't get the versatility that Bolt of Fire had, but that's completely fine. This spell is really strong. It has issues with accuracy, but you can fix that with something like Zombie Hands. Zombie Hands Starburst is a combo that I mentioned somewhat frequently in my streams. Zombie Hands is also a bolt. That one you can target, funnily enough. But it pretty much removes the evasion from monsters, and it cannot be dodged or blocked or anything. So you cast that, and then the monsters cannot dodge, and then you cast a Starburst, and the monsters just die, which is really good. Yeah, really, really good indeed. Mm, Anyway, Starburst, I think it's pretty nice personally. I think it's a spell worth getting, unlike many of the spells that I've already talked about. Specifically, like the level 4, level 5 spells, those ones are kind of whack. This one is not. This one is legit pretty good. It also comes into your character at a point in the game where like bolts, monsters are gonna start seeing having like shields and stuff. Um, and this ignores shields in its entirety, so pretty good. Um, I could see myself maybe getting Fireball if I got this for Spriggans, because this spell is trash against anything that has like very high amounts of evasion if you don't couple it with Zombie Hands. But you may not have Zombie Hands, or you may not have the ability to cast it yet, so Fireball might be a good placeholder. Anyway, I think I already talked a lot about Starburst. Next on the list we have hmm, I think we have Ignition. For Ignition, all foes in the caster's surroundings are engulfed in bolts of fire. The caster and their allies are protected from the fire and will never be harmed by this spell. This spell is amazing. This is like legit, really, really good. Which is kind of like a deviation from what we have already seen for fire magic. This spell is one of the most important spells to carry to a Ziggurat. If the monsters are not weak to fire, this spell murders them. Or like if the monsters are not resistant to fire, I meant. Um, if they are resistant to fire, they're probably weak to cold, and so you cast refrigeration. So yeah, like the combination of ignition and Nosokubo's refrigeration is relatively cheap to get. Well, not really. I guess level 8 single school is still very expensive. Um, but it does a lot of damage. They hit the entirety of screen, like the two of them. This one's utility scales heavily, drastically, with the amount of monsters that are clumped up together. So despite the fact that it is a spell that literally hits the entirety of the screen, it is still a positional magic spell because it requires your opponents, your monsters, the enemy monsters, to be positioned in such a way that they can get hit by more than one explosion. Because in case it wasn't obvious, the monsters do get hit by more than one explosion. They get hit by the one that targets them, and they get hit by any explosions that are adjacent to them. So theoretically, if you have a 3x3 of monsters, the monster in the center is going to get hit by 9 explosions, and it's very hard for it to survive. Even monsters that only get hit by like 3 or 4 explosions, it's very hard for them to survive a single cast of these. And at that point, you're probably going to be left with very little monsters, so you probably want to follow up with something else that is not Ignition. As I mentioned, the power of this spell scales with how many explosions the monsters get hit by. So yeah, Ignition is a really strong spell. Really strong for Sigurats, really strong for Cocytus, really strong for a fair amount of Extended. Do not try it on monsters that are strong to fire or immune to fire. You're probably going to be very disappointed with their results. But if the monsters are not strong to fire, they're not resistant, Ignition is fantastic. Yeah. Next on our list, and I think the final spell for Fire Magic is going to be Firestorm. Unless I missed a spell, but I don't think I did. Firestorm calls forth a mighty storm or roaring flame directly onto the target, dealing damage in a large area and leaving behind short-lived fire vortices. A portion of its damage bypasses fire resistance. This spell is very good. Um, this spell is fantastic. Um, it is a very useful spell. If you have Behemoth, it will be guaranteed to hit monsters outside of your line of sight. If you don't have Behemoth, it still can do that. It's just significantly less reliable that it hits monsters outside of your line of sight. This spell doesn't hit the entirety of the screen, doesn't offer the utility that Shatter does, doesn't offer the damage over time that Polar Vortex does, but it offers Burst, and it offers very safe Burst, something that Chain Lightning doesn't do. So that's the utility of Firestorm. Firestorm is not a single level 9 spell that you cast once and you're done with the fight and you won. No, Firestorm you cast it like 5 or 6 times and it kills everything before they have a chance to hurt you. It can legit kill everything. You can kill Orbs of Fire with this. If I had an option, I wouldn't try, but you can certainly do it. Um, It can also kill Cerebov, but I would also once again try to look for an alternative. Usually when I go into extended, I have Shatter. So Shatter is pretty good for Cerebov, but that is completely unrelated to the video. Regardless, Firestorm, really good for Antaeus, really good for Lomlobon, really good for pretty much all Hell Lords and Pan Lords that are not Asmodeus, Dispater, or Cerebov. And the reason why I'm talking about extended monsters is because this is a level 9 dual school spell. There's very little experience in a 3-room game compared to going into extended, and as a result of that, it's very unlikely that you will actually have these. And if you have this, you probably don't have many other things, such as a high level in fighting or defenses or other spells. It can be the case that you have these and other spells, but I feel like that happens to me more often than not when I'm playing like. Something like a deep elf. And of course, if I am a Jinn and I got this, that's also another way to have variety. But yeah, regardless, this spell is definitely worth building for. It's very expensive. It is dual school level 9 compared to single school level 9 Polar Vortex, single school level 9 Shatter. Think about it. If you have 0 skill in Conjurations and Fire, it costs you the same amount of experience, assuming equal aptitudes, to get Polar Vortex and Shatter than getting Firestorm. Like the same amount of experience, assuming equal aptitudes. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind. The conjuration like part of the dual school in Firestorm makes it very expensive, but it is worth it to get. However, it may not be what you want to get on every character. You need to like think about if you want to have the ability to snipe things from afar, if you can actually sustain the mana cost of using Firestorm, because you have to cast it multiple times per fight, that kind of thing. So yeah, that's Firestorm, and I think with Firestorm that's it for all the spells in Fire Magic. There are not that many spells in Fire Magic. It's funny compared to like transmutations. There were so many spells in transmutations. But yeah, in my opinion, Fire Magic is a bit nerfed. Maybe it should get buffed a bit, but only a teeny tiny bit. It doesn't have to be as glorious as it used to be, but it also shouldn't be trash. And I think right now it leans more towards trash than towards being back to its former glory. there's some very few spells in Fire Magic that I enjoy. Most of them are I would rather just like use something else if I have the choice. So yeah, that's it for Fire Magic. Thank you for watching and thank you for hanging out. If you enjoyed what you saw, you should consider following on Twitch and subscribing on YouTube if you haven't done that already. And if you have, you can consider subscribing on Twitch. I understand if you don't want to or you can't, but it does help me if you choose to do so. With that being said, I will be back next week for another Spell School overview. I accept requests or suggestions in the comments of what's cool to do next. This time I didn't really get any suggestion over the whole week, so I just decided to go with Fire Magic because I have done Air Magic, Earth Magic, and Ice Magic, so Fire Magic was the only one that was remaining. And yeah, tomorrow I'll post something else. So yeah, I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope to see you around in my stream sometime soon. Thank you for watching. Have a nice rest of your day.